Hello, I'm Paul Sheasley, and today we're talking about how I think about leadership and the end state I'm building for leaders, specifically around clarity, steadiness, and alignment that holds when pressure hits. I'm bringing this up for three reasons. One, most leadership breakdowns aren't skill problems, they're operating system problems, and what happens when stakes and ambiguity arise. Two, teams don't just follow strategy, they follow your signal, your consistency, decision quality. And three, leadership has to integrate, right? So if it can't be personal growth, it translates into your team, your different direct reports, and your management layer. So why me? I'm a psychotherapist and an executive coach and founder of EPC Leadership, Executive Performance Coaching, where I work with CEOs and leadership teams in high pressure environments. And I come at this from three different angles. The first is performance psychology, how pressure affects judgment. The second, executive execution, how priorities turn into follow through. And the third, systems leadership, how alignment holds across layers. So here's my perspective, and the prime question I start with when I'm evaluating leadership or working with a leader. I'm not starting with personality. I'm not asking, are they charismatic, or are they impressive in a room, or do they even speak well? The question that I'm tracking is what happens to the system when pressure hits the leader. Because pressure reveals the real operating system in leadership. Everyone can look calm when things are stable. Everyone can sound wise when they're not personally threatened. But pressure exposes how you interpret reality, how you handle uncertainty, and how you respond to tension, and how you make decisions when there isn't a perfect answer, or how you affect the people around you when you're carrying the load. If you want a simple way to see leadership clearly, this is it. Under pressure, do you create coherence or do you create turbulence? So what do I mean by this operating system? So when I say operating system, I'm not being abstract. I mean the consistent pattern of how a leader does five things. One, interprets information, specifically signal versus noise. Two, how they regulate emotions, urgency, anxiety, or defensiveness. Three, how they make decisions with clarity, speed, trade-offs, and follow-through. Four, communication, stable messaging versus mixed signals. And five, how they relate to people, trust versus control, and autonomy versus dependency. That operating system is always running, and a team can feel it, even if you never talk about it. That's why leadership isn't just what you say, it's what people experience when they're near you. So what's my definition of leadership? Well, here it is. Leadership is the ability to create clarity and stability in other people while reality is moving. That's it. Not hype, not control, not constant positivity. Clarity and stability, especially when conditions are uncertain. Because when reality is moving, when the markets shift or people leave or projects break, boards get impatient, teams start asking questions whether they say them out loud or not. They'll ask things like, are we okay? What are we prioritizing? Are we safe? Is leadership aligned? What do we tell our teams? And what happens if we fail? The leader's job is to answer those questions with credible direction, not fantasy and not avoidance, and obviously not reactivity. So most leadership breakdowns don't come from low competence. They come from predictable internal defaults. especially under stress. So it's urgency that spreads, it's control that tightens, avoidance that delays, approval seeking that messes with decisions, an identity that fuses to being right or being needed. And here's the part that truly matters. Those internal defaults don't stay inside the leader. They become the climate to the organization and the teams. A leader who's anxious is going to create an anxious organization. A leader who's avoidant is going to create an avoidant downstream. And a leader who is inconsistent will create politics. So when I work with leaders, I'm not only looking at what they do, I'm looking at what they transmit. So the end state that I'm building, the transformation. So when leaders come to me, they usually want impact. They want better execution, stronger teams, higher performance, less drama, more clarity. But the end state I'm actually building is much deeper. A leader who stays steady under load, who makes cleaner decisions with less churn, can communicate signal and not noise, can hold tension and capacity without escalating it. They're able to build alignment without micromanaging and create a system that functions even when they're not around. That is maturity, leadership maturity. Because the highest level of leadership is not being the engine. It's building an organization that doesn't depend on your constant energy to stay coherent. So what does this transformation actually look like, right? Well, let's make it tangible. So here's a couple of before and after shifts that you can feel in your organization. So you can feel urgency before, and after you feel calibrated urgency. Shifting priorities become stable priorities. Unclear decision rights become clear ownership. Communication is reactive, and then we move to consistent messaging. Conflict avoidance, clean repair and directness. Politics and side conversations become problems handled in the room. And leader as a bottleneck becomes autonomy with guardrails for others. This is why I say it's an operating system issue, because these shifts aren't about one tactic. They're about default settings. So how does this get installed in a team, not just the leader? Well, this is where leadership becomes real, because a leader can develop personally and still not change the system. Even if you get steadier, your meetings still create confusion. Or even if you get clearer, the decision rights are still vague and ambiguous. Or even if you're less reactive, but your managers are still afraid to tell the truth. The organization will ultimately pull you right back into those old dynamics. So I pay attention to 3 levels of integration. So the first level is integration with the leadership team. At the top level, the work is usually about shared reality, decision clarity, alignment rhythms, reducing political drag, so no hidden vetoes. So this is where leadership stops being communication and becomes coherence. So the practical signs this is improving is that there's going to be fewer meetings to get aligned. Decisions are going to stick longer, and trade-offs are actually named instead of avoided. And the executive team stops outsourcing conflict to the CEO. Integration with direct reports is another. This is where leadership is either going to scale or it's going to collapse. If direct reports don't have decision authority, everything escalates. So if escalation rules are unclear, the leader becomes the dumping ground. So we need to install a clear ownership, autonomy with clear guardrails, escalation rules. So this comes to me, this stays with you, and obviously feedback loops that are regular and not crisis driven. So a leader's job here is to develop leaders, not to build dependency. And when this is working, the leader gets lighter, not because less is happening, but because the system is actually healthier. The third is integration with management layers. So this layer is the translation organ of strategy. So middle management is where strategy either becomes real or becomes theater. So integration here means several things. It's consistent meeting outputs, so the decisions, the owners, the deadlines. There's signal integrity, so strategy doesn't distort as it moves down. We've got a reduction in churn, so the priorities aren't shifting day to day or weekly or even monthly. And there's obviously psychological safety for truth telling, so bad news can actually move upwards. If management can't translate, execution collapses, even if the strategy is brilliant. See it all the time. So, presence versus availability. Super important with my leaders. This is one of the most important leadership distinctions I work with or work on. So, a lot of executives confuse leadership with being constantly available or accessible. But accessibility is not the same as presence. Presence is the system where one can feel, they can feel you even though you're not immediately responding. So this happens when you build specific decision rights, meeting structures that produce outputs, clear priorities and trade-offs, autonomy with guardrails, and consistent language across leadership. So the organization doesn't require you as the emotional regulator. So this is what prevents leadership burnout and organizational dependency. So what does something like this sound like in real conversations? Because language obviously matters. Part of the integration is giving leaders language that installs clarity. So here's a few lines that actually change teams from what, right? So here's what's decided, here's what's open for input, and here's where you have full autonomy. Let's name the trade-off. If we prioritize A, we are deprioritizing B. What is the prime question this meeting is answering? What's signal here and what's noise? What would done look like by the end of the week? And what are we telling the team after this meeting in 1 to 2 sentences? These aren't slogans, they're operating system moves. They are designed to reduce ambiguity, and ambiguity is where politics grows. So, a lot of leadership development focuses on skills. I focus on the conditions that determine whether skills hold under pressure. Because when pressure hits, nobody rises through their goals. They fall to their operating system. And the leaders I work with aren't trying to become perfect, they're trying to become durable. Durable enough that strategy doesn't collapse under stress, teams don't panic when the leader is quiet, priorities don't shift weekly, and execution remains coherent even when reality is moving. That's the end state. So I have a few reflection questions for you. Under pressure, do I stabilize the system or unintentionally destabilize it? Do people understand how I think, or are they guessing what I want? And where is alignment breaking? The leadership team, direct reports, or management layer? If I got 20% steadier internally, what would change externally? This is my perspective on leadership. And the end state I'm committed to building in leaders and teams clarity, steadiness, and alignment that holds when things get hard. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.